Welcome to this presentation on Reliability. In this presentation we're going to give you a brief introduction to the Roadmap to Reliability. The Roadmap to Reliability identifies the major elements of the reliability improvement strategy. Now we do have a much longer video on this particular topic if you would like to go through it, but this is just a sort of a brief introduction. Basically it looks like this. Okay, so if you think about how your program's going to work, you know that there's going to be certain elements that you will need to have in place. So for example, you will need to do a bit of a failure modes assessment and decide which pieces of equipment you're going to run to failure, which you will perform condition-based maintenance, which you will perform interval-based maintenance, so time-based or based on running hours or miles travelled and that sort of thing. And then finally you might identify that there is some equipment that sort of falls through the cracks and you may have to consider redesign because you can't assess the condition or determine the condition. It's too critical to run to failure, but there's no time-based activity that makes sense either. So you need those elements in place, but in order to make those decisions there are also certain steps you need to go through. So first you need to have a master asset list and you need to understand the criticality of those assets. It's very difficult to perform any sort of planning work, any work involved with the failure modes and so on, unless you properly understand the asset criticality ranking. And all these things we're talking about here is what is covered in Reliability, so therefore we provide training on how to develop that asset criticality ranking. Then we look at the failure modes. Now, this is going to sound like classical RCM, and there is a lot of RCM in Reliability. The difference is we take a more practical approach. There is a lot that's already very well understood and documented about failure modes of equipment and so on. So what you might find is that you will perform a more detailed study of the most critical assets. Of course you will have assessed what they are, maybe the top 10 to 20% of your assets, and the rest we can take a more streamlined approach. Bottom line is we will determine, be able to make these decisions based on the study we go through here. Now we can also look at this reliability study and start to think about mean time between failure and reliability block diagrams and so on. But I would just say that if you're starting out a program, it may be premature to look at any of that because your mean time between failure data, anything you have may not be very accurate or very usable. That's typically what we find. And the second thing is you would be measuring an unreliable system, the system you're trying to improve. So I would argue that we put all of these things in place, we haven't got to them all yet, and when you are making improvements in reliability, that's when you should start measuring it so that you can make those sorts of decisions. Anyway, so we need to perform this analysis and this work so that we can make these decisions so that we can go through this sort of a process. And we can look at the procurement process and make sure that we are designing and purchasing with life cycle costs in mind, not short-term lowest cost options in mind. We need to look at the stores and inventory process and make sure we've got the right spares in inventory, that it's being stored properly, that we can access it quickly, those sorts of things. We need to have a good planning and scheduling process in place so that the right people are doing the right jobs with the right tools, etc. We need to use precision skills when we align machines, balance machines, lubricate machines, operate machines and so on. That gives the machine the best opportunity to provide the most reliable service. We need to look at the operator care issues, how we're going to operate the machines properly, lubricate them properly and so on, so that once we've installed the bearings properly, we've aligned the machine properly, we've done all those sorts of things with our mechanical and electrical equipment. Now when we're operating them, we have to do what we can to keep it, maintain it and keep it operating reliably. And last but not least, when things do fail, we need to use some sort of root cause failure analysis process, taking a practical approach to get to the root cause and do something about it. Now, you notice it's blank over here, and that's because a lot of people look at each one of these individually. They dive into doing precision alignment and they do a bit of condition monitoring and so on. And it helps, but without all of these pieces put together properly, programs often don't get very good results and may even fail. So let's look at some of the other elements. We have to make sure we've got a good foundation to our program. We need to get the leadership in place. Now, number one, you need some sort of group that's going to lead the charge with people from the maintenance and operations and safety and quality, but also making sure that you've got people who represent the mechanics and operators and so on. Everyone's got a lot of good information to contribute, a lot of experience with the equipment, and when you want to make changes, those changes will be easier when you've had more buy-in to the process. But it also requires senior management support as well. So you need the vision statement and the plan of how you're going to go about doing it. And this process right here, even though we have a much more detailed process map, which we'll talk about separately, this process here can form your plan, but it needs that senior manager to say, yes, reliability is important just as safety is important, and go through this process. As part of all of this, we must consider the human aspects, the people aspects, and think about human error and the way people deal with change and change management and communications and so on. It's very important we get that culture change aspect right and just understand, how can I put it, the sort of human failings, the reason why these problems develop in the first place, and that way we can solve these problems. And last but certainly not least, for these main blocks here, we have to look at the training requirements. And of course, Unreliability is providing a lot of training for the senior management, program management, people who need the skills in condition monitoring and maintenance activities, and the plant floor toolbox talks that we talk about in the other modules. So all of these elements, we start with these elements to get the program going and working properly. We perform this analysis so that we can make the decisions for each asset, run to failure, condition-based, interval-based, or whether redesign is necessary. We make sure we perform all of these steps to ensure that the plant's going to be reliable. But last but certainly not least, when we consider the program in its entirety, we have to consider the continuous improvement aspect. We're using root cause failure analysis to determine why equipment still fails, but we need to do a benchmarking process. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning, but we also need KPIs so that we can measure our progress, see where the gaps still lie. We need a fracas process. We need to promote the program, making sure that everyone understands the successes and the failures, but everyone understands the value of it so that this program is sustainable. And I would argue that if you took care of all of these aspects, you will have a successful reliability improvement initiative, and Unreliability is providing the training so that you can do just that. There is much more we could say about the roadmap to reliability and our process map and the training we provide, but we're trying to keep these movies a little shorter. So if you are ready to take the next step with this product, we'd love to talk to you about the financial pricing options, what the subscriptions cost and what the options are for the number of users you might have at your plant or sister plants and so on. If you like, you can get inside and take a quick look at Unreliability and see what all these modules are, see how easy it is to learn and set up and so on. Please write to us at learn@mobiusinstitute.com if you don't already have the contact details of a reseller or someone at Mobius Institute. But thank you very much for viewing this presentation. I know it takes some time, but thank you very much for watching this presentation.